potato.
Good afternoon, and welcome everybody to the panel Extracting Histories of Complicity with Lisa Rave and Femke Herregraven. My name is Inga Seidler, exhibition curator here at Transmediale. And this panel features two artists who are also showing works here in the exhibition Territories of Complicity, and it connects in various ways to the different thematic threads and backgrounds of the show. In just a minute, Etienne Turpin, the moderator of this panel, will give you a more detailed introduction to the panel, Extracting Histories of Complicity. Etienne is a philosopher and research scientist at the MIT, as well as founding director of Annex Act Office, his design and research practice based in Jakarta and Berlin. He's also a co-principal investigator of Reassembling the Natural, an exhibition-led inquiry into the natural histories of the Anthropocene. And he is the co-editor of the Intercalations paginated exhibition series. So welcome Etienne, Lisa and Femke.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everyone for coming this afternoon. We can't see you at all, so when we get to the questions, please just make yourself a little more visible. So I just wanted to begin very briefly with a few remarks. I'll then introduce Lisa, who will present about her project, and then introduce Femke, who will present about her project here as well, in addition to both of their practices, and then we will have a conversation about extraction, both in its historical context, but also in terms of futurity. So I think it's important to say that while the panel is titled Extracting Histories of Complicity, both Lisa and Femke's work deal not only with that historical context, but with its present and with its future implications, both in terms of real scenarios currently unfolding in contemporary capitalism, but also in terms of speculative ways of anticipating the violence and weirdness of some of those futures. I think one of the important points of reference in thinking through this work in anticipation of this panel for me, but also mourning the loss of an incredibly important figure who influenced my practice greatly. As many of you will know, Ursula K Le Guin passed away just several weeks ago. And her practice as a science fiction writer really opened up a number of questions for me about the role of we could call an environmental science fiction and a speculative practice that was attentive to the violence of capitalism and the processes of extractivism which underpin our contemporary consumption, but which we're rarely allowed to see. And so in the spirit of Ursula Le Guin's work and in the spirit of a kind of environmental science fiction, we're going to talk a little bit about maybe we could say the existential complicity which now affects us all, whether we are participating in culture, art, or any other form of commerce. It is now as if we're caught in a situation of a kind of ubiquitous ransomware of contemporary capitalism, where to be contemporary is to be complicit in the violence of capitalism and its extractivism. I think both Lisa and Femke's work speak to this in different ways, but without taking any further, I'll introduce Lisa so that we can begin this conversation. So Lisa Rave, her DJ name, currently lives and works in Berlin. She studied experimental film at the University of Arts Berlin, as well as photography at Bard College in New York. Her recent exhibitions and screenings include the Oceanic, currently on view at the Center for Contemporary Art in Singapore, Lofoten International Art Festival, Arsenal Berlin, TBA Contemporary Augarten, Glasmug Cologne, and the third Istanbul Design Biennale, among many others. I hope you've had a chance to see the work, but if not, we will get some selections from it now. So please join me in welcoming Lisa Rave.
I guess this is mine. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that so many people came. I'm going to talk a little bit about my film that is in the exhibition, and I really hope that you've seen it, because, yeah, it makes more sense if you know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project, its structure, the material some of the material that informed the work, and the afterlife of the project. So the project actually started with an article I had read in 2013 that talked about deep sea mining. I actually, at that time, had never heard about deep sea mining, so it was a very intriguing thing for me to look into deeper. And the article was talking about a kind of a gold rush in the ocean, and that there are vast amounts of valuable minerals embedded in the ocean floor. These are significantly valuable because of the increasing demand on the world market. Many of these minerals play an instrumental role in the products of modern technology. This is actually a screenshot that I took from my computer, the screensaver that showed these images, and this will make sense to you later. I researched further in what kind of minerals exactly will be mined there, and one of them really stood out for me, which was called europium. Europium, named after Europe, is a rare earth and is used in display technology. LCD screens, smartphone displays, and uses the natural phosphorescent features of the material. And it's responsible for the brilliance and the vivid colors on our displays and LCD screens, actually making them vivid and appearing brighter. So when we see images on a display like this, we are literally seeing it with and through europium, which in and of itself, for me as a filmmaker, was very interesting to think about. The very material that makes images appear in the way they are to us, and their own narrative, was something that I was really interested in. But europium is not only used in display screens and LCD screens, but also finds itself in our currency. It's actually embedded in our European banknote, and it's fluorescent secure and is used as a security marker, basically verifying it as real currency. And to me, remarkable was the fact that europium actually cannot be found in Europe itself, and that in the future it will be taken from the ocean floor. So there's a Canadian company called Nautilus Minerals, which is right now in the process of developing the technologies which also the article that I had read was talking about. And they're doing this with the help of German entrepreneurs and engineers in Bremen. So I found a promotion video that advertised or sort of explained the process of mining, which I want to show you. So it's really weird also how the objects are just falling, or the material on board is just falling from the sky. It's just as simple as that. So I can skip a little bit ahead. So here it basically explains how we're going to mine minerals from the ocean floor, 1,600 meters deep into the ocean. And what for me was very striking about this video was, even though it clearly shows the process of over-representation, it describes the landscape as purely a commodity, stripped from any form of life. And yeah, basically, this shows precisely the problem of how we mainly look at nature today. Nautilus Minerals intends to initiate the mining process first in the Bismarck Sea, in Papua New Guinea in the South Pacific. And as the name already implies, Germany has already carved through this part of the world through our previous colonial exploits. Resources from the region were being exported back to Europe, all the while missionaries were introducing Christianity to the indigenous communities. And the missionaries regarded their traditional belief of spirit within things as primitive. So what also, maybe is on a personal note, made me look deeper into the places and subjects was that my great-grand-uncle August Rave had actually been a captain in that region at the time in the Bismarck Sea. And he spent a couple of years commandeering a ship in the South Pacific. And this particular family history and the link had left a deep impression on me. And specifically when I was reading about the Bismarck Sea and the mining that was supposed to happen there. I also remember admiring the curiosities that he had brought back to the family, which were in parts also exotic shells, which surely informed my work, as you might have seen. There's, the shell itself is a very important element throughout the film. European, my film, attempts to show the way in which meaning and value are reinterpreted from colonial structures to the present transnational and privatized markets commanding the global economy. This reinterpretation of value is perhaps most evident in the film through the indigenous shell currency and the shell themselves becoming valued for their chemical compositions, acting as a guides to mineral resources such as europium on the ocean floor. I want to talk a little bit about the structure of my work. One of the main motifs that runs throughout the film is the Nautilus shell. It's the Nautilus shell is not only the logo, as you have seen, of Nautilus Minerals. It's also a symbol in the South Pacific cultures to ward off foreign spirits. And it's an iconic symbol for the perfect proportion found in nature. The film itself is structured like a Nautilus shell. Sequential narratives are nested within one another. Many connections can be drawn throughout the film. The reappearing motive of the frame containing the image, the essence within things that determines their value, system of exchange, and the storage. These kind of structural patterns are perfectly exemplified in the shape of the Nautilus itself, where previous elements reappear and grow exponentially. Structurally, the film also progresses qualitatively through the images themselves. Beginning with grainy archival footage, small in size, the film moves to extremely saturated images of nature used in advertisements, to 3D animations illustrating the mining operations. So the element of growth and progress was very important to me. I saw it almost like as a spiraling upwards, and asking myself to which extent or where the limits of this growth lies in our modern society, that in fact becomes more and more alienated from nature. And while I'd hoped for the film to actually travel to the South Pacific, I did not have the means to do it back then, so instead I focused my research on that particular landscape, the South Pacific, from within Germany entirely. And only used material that I could find while being in Germany. And so I filmed at several oceanic institutes that were exploring the ocean floor of the region. They had video material, rocks, shells, analysis of that specifically particular region in the South Pacific. Then there was a wharf in Bremen that was developing ships for the mining in the South Pacific. A mineral trading company that was trading minerals to private investors. And I also began working with the Ethnological Museum here in Berlin, which had provided me with the images from early explorers and scientists in the South Pacific. And I noticed that there was a vast amount of objects, materials from the region. And in the end, actually this constraint of not being able to travel made it even more interesting to me. The accumulated German perspective on that landscape became part of the formal concept of the film, underlying the Eurocentric gaze on that particular landscape. I would like to show another short extract from a video that I got from Marum, who are also investigating specifically the South Pacific region right now, but also the Indian Ocean, both doing research, both doing research on what actually exists there and the ecosystems, trying to understand the ecosystems of the oceans, but also, of course, trying to find out what resources exist there for exploitation. So this, I kind of like specifically this video, which is of course nothing they would usually show, but when I went through the archives, I found this was just this camera being dropped into the ocean, into this abyss that we have no idea really about what there is or how it functions. So the other video was specifically from the Bismarck Sea, where they had researched and did video recordings. And it's also funny, this sort of, I don't know, this sentimental music that they put underneath, for me, kind of absurd, because it shows it in a kind of romantic way. But what are we actually doing there? Why do we look deeper into this place is because of minerals, on the one hand. I mean, it's also always the question who finances these researchers. So there's always this conflict between fundamental science and applied science. But also, what really struck me about this video is that it's done by robots, traveling, as I said, thousands of meters deep into the ocean, exploring places that we can physically never reach, experience, or get there without modern technology, which again are being minerals are being mined for modern technology. So there's this weird loop as well. I want to show these little models that I filmed at the wharf in Bremen, which shows the mining. It ridicules it a little bit, or makes it, or shows even more to me the abstraction, in a way, or our relationship to it. Like the guy that I interviewed, he was presenting them to me as toys, basically. And so this was 2014 when I did the filming, then interviewed him, and he was still it was all still in the process. But now actually, these are the machines that are already there. So they're actually now located in the Bismarck Sea. This is a photo taken by a dear friend of mine and filmmaker, photographer Armin Linke, who for a bigger sort of investigation into this issue has been traveling there. So, as a matter of fact, mining will begin in 2019. That's the plan. Just maybe to talk shortly about the afterlife of the project. I was invited to show my film at an ocean conference where there was a gathering of NGOs, international NGOs, and there were two women from the South Pacific region, one from Fiji, the other from Papua New Guinea. And I showed my screened my film there, and I was actually quite nervous about how they would perceive it, because I'm talking so much also about their ancient cultures and so on and so on. And so they were actually quite positive about it and invited me to come to Fiji to be part in a local gathering of young activists. And that really had a very strong impact on me, because I noticed like their efforts for self-determination, which sort of obviously doesn't play a role in my film, and I sort of re-established my view on these people, basically, that before I was only able to read about or look at all this footage that I had from Germany. So it's also really interesting how really even my perception was so shaped, and how different it is when you actually engage with people and see their struggles. So they actually form a pretty strong protest movement, which reaches across the Pacific Ocean. Very importantly for them is also smartphones, Facebook. But just to end it there, they also were the host of COP23. And so I think that the resistance that's being formed based on indigenous communities and their close relationship to the ocean is really, really strong. So.
Thank you. Thank you. While we switch these computers out, yeah?
No, I think they can switch.
It's all done? Okay, magic. I mean, I hadn't seen the image of the actual machines, only in the film the toys, where the scientist presents the 3 toys, puts them down on the desk and says, these are the machines that will do this work. And it's quite a strong dissonance of those aren't machines, those are toys. And when we see the actual image of this scale and scope of extraction, I think the violence becomes much more clear. Nautilus is also traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the largest extraction exchange in the world. And I'm currently involved in a project looking at the TSX as a way of both financializing mineral extraction, but also the externalities that come with that extraction, particularly how those externalities affect indigenous communities. And so with that, I think I'll introduce Femke. Femke Herregraven is an artist who explores the new material base geographies and value systems carved out by contemporary financial technologies and infrastructures. Her ongoing investigations focus on the relationships between financial value, ecosystems, self-organizing systems, and geological instability. Her work exists digitally and as drawings, prints, sculptures, video, and installations, and her work in A4 is an interactive piece that we'll see some of now. She has exhibited at T293 Rome, Serpentine, ZKM, Stildig, every place you've ever heard of, on all of the continents, and she teaches at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam and is currently a resident at the Rijks Academy in Amsterdam as well. Please join me in welcoming Femke Herregraven.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I thought I'd show you this line of text that I checked this morning online, and actually what it represents is a catastrophe bond. And a catastrophe bond is a financial product where investment companies basically try to hedge themselves against risk for a potential natural disaster. And so this is one catastrophe bond that's currently being traded, and it deals with potential tropical cyclones, earthquakes, etc. And you have tons of these catastrophe bonds in the market that's being traded. And I think it's a nice sort of almost twin sister of the shell of your twin brother, no, twin sister, of the shell. In a way, it's nothing material, but there is this kind of data mining by the financial market going on potential things that might happen in the climate and our environments. Just this as a sort of thing to put out there. I think maybe I briefly show, for people who don't know it yet, I show some really briefly older works. I got interested in finance like 7 years ago in a way, and since then I've been working in this field because I think it's really an interesting sort of edge where value, technology, and aesthetics sort of merge for me as an artist. Initially, I found out in Amsterdam that there's tons of these mailbox companies that are there to avoid taxes. Google, Facebook, the whole shebang, they all have their headquarters in Amsterdam, just as a, you know, it's not really a company, it's just a mailbox company to avoid taxes. And when I figured that out, I kind of made this game in 2013, because I thought, like, other people have to know about this, what is the best way to do it? I just make an online game that uses all real existing data on tax, corporate tax rates around the world, and the idea is that you as a player get the assignment for a company that you choose yourself to avoid as much tax as possible, and you made this sort of planning for them, and then your route is your international route of mailbox companies uploaded into this database. People can download it, and in a way, as a crowd, we sort of map, all these possibilities that are out there for corporations. Then this was a little sort of follow-up called Liquid Citizenship, and in a way it looks at the same thing, tax avoidance, but this time not by corporation, but by wealthy individuals. And how this happens is that they actually acquire second passports. There is actually a market for this. So I'm working now on an update for it, but here you can, for example, on the left side see that Dominica, you can buy their passports for 100,000 euros in government fund. You get voting right even included. Cyprus offers something for $2 million real estate investment. You get a passport if you do that instantly. Vanuatu also offers a passport that you can even pay with Bitcoin. So it's about the financialization of something like nationhood, or also I think, of yourself in a way, but instead of it being this sort of bird by right, it becomes also a product that you can pick up and drop by will or force. Yeah, so this is the kind of way that I worked at the time, because my background is also in graphic design, so I made all these sort of graphic mappings. I tried to understand these. This is the Cyprus sandwich on the right, the double Irish-Dutch sandwich on the left. This is the sort of text constructions they make. But yeah, I ended up in this sort of loop of always these graphic images, and on your screen you can make everything logical and make it work. But then I decided to actually go to these tax havens and see what do I see? Can I find sort of clues, where I can actually see this industry? So you have the obvious one, accounting schools, so this kind of stuff. I also used to monitor these type of buildings the whole day. And then suddenly this little van would pop up with a logo of Ernst & Young, and then you would know, oh, that's where the tax lawyers are that make these constructions. They sponsor also public architecture. Or they have also nice sunshades. But then I started questioning, like, why is it that these places are tax havens? Why are these financial hubs in the world? Because they're these minuscule islands. And it has to do with these things, deep sea cables. We all hear a lot about them. But it actually, goes back to the 1850s, when the British Empire constructed a project called the All Red Line, where they tried to connect all their colonies with this new technology called the telegraph line. And yeah, in a way, they sort of created this network without going over hostile foreign territory to manage and control their colonies faster. And if you actually look at the internet cable map of today, it follows still those routes. So this is an important map for me, actually. And also in relation to something else I was researching, which is high-frequency trading, which looks on a trader screen like this. Again, this sort of immense abstraction, but you're looking here at 100th of a second, and these are all trades being made. It's like abstract painting, almost. Yeah, and I started to sort of, this is 2012, map where all these cables land, important as the backbone for financial markets. But again, a map, so I also started going to these places. So this is Mauritius. This is the cable landing point in France. Another one in France. This is Curacao, Caribbean. This is Bali in Indonesia. Mauritius again. Yeah, and so then I got in this sort of loop of like endlessly mapping everything and making complex data visualizations. But this, at some point, it's also frustrating because you realize, yeah, we can put everything in a map and in a complex visualization and feel good about ourselves that we kind of think we grasp it. But I needed another kind of opening in my work to, think about this whole financial world in another way. So then I started working on the work that you see here. And that emerged actually from me being in the Arctic, where I was researching the submarine cable that they are going to construct in the near future, as is always the case with these things. And the cable will run from London to Tokyo, and it will cut the trading time with 42 milliseconds. And the reason why this cable is not there before is because there was always Arctic ice. But now, since through global warming and it's melting, it will become possible for the first time to put this cable there. So then I got, yeah, here you see the cable. Then I got interested in this, this is the cable landing point that they're planning. I got interested in this idea of how financial value is connected to terrains or territories that are unstable in some sort of way. So a huge piece of ice that breaks off the Antarctica and starts floating, like, is that sea or is that land? You know, we have this very binary approach to deal with territory in a way. Or this new island that popped up in the coast of Pakistan because of a submarine volcano. Like, what is this place? Like, how do we approach that? I think what's also interesting that you see often satellite footage being, these places are not mapped in HD yet, so you have to make this sort of compilation of it. And then at the time when I was researching this unstable terrain, I found this book, and this quote is very important to me, so I'm just going to read it. The association of territory with linear narrative of progress explains why recalcitrant environments were condemned in moral terms. Swamp, littoral zones, and the like deceived or were unreliable because they spoke, as it were, with forked tongues. Such sophistical places made mockery of science. They defied the language of description, Western hegemony. They dumbfounded discourse. They revealed the gaps in geographical knowledge as gaping holes in eloquence. Hence, the disparagement of such places found expression in a protest against the language in which they were described. So there's this idea that things like swamps or terrains that are really hard to grasp, in a way they were always left out, or they were always posted in literature as a disgusting place, or a place where there was sickness, or things like that. And so I started, in a way, building this sort of work that you see in the exhibition more as a tool myself to collect all this research. And it is always a scenario on an unstable terrain. And it consists of these sort of media objects. I can show you. Here there are now 10 chapters. And these are the black boxes that you also see as this sort of reminiscent of this sort of territory that's kind of gonna crash or disappear in the near future. So I'm going to show you some how it works.
Believe me, you're on the guest list for scalable affection. Micronations are always ego nations. They believe to be the salt of the earth. But if their history tells us anything, it's that their infrastructures crumble. If their future tells us anything, it's that their matter is volatile. But volatile territories refuse to be mapped, to be monitored, to be measured. Loopholes in loopholes. You can't control what you can't measure. Regressive fumes, collapsing protocols, micronations as narrative artifacts, imagined by a Delphi on a sinking mud volcano. This is the place where the new sprawling swamps are born. In the weak underbelly of the Antarctica ice sheet, stolen artworks are contained inside 4 massive platforms, donated by an artist who raided art storage zones. If art was going to be locked away and inaccessible, then at least for something else than tax cuts. Melting, calving ice, accelerating ice streams, artworks drifting along. Uncertain matter creates uncertain value. Scientific results feeds hyperbole speculation. The fates of ice and art intertwined. Preserve or empty cache. A blockchain ledger sued by a cluster of solar panels. A blue tuna flock testifies against an algorithm. Material witnesses testify instantly. The bootleg tribunal for non-humans as a mix between a tech startup and a textile factory employs the people of the glacier with their knowledge of loopholes in anthropocentric laws to invent and weave material evidence so that nature and things can be granted the same rights as humans. When the geological and the political blur, who and what can be held accountable? Does a jury matter? I'm sure you get my vote.
Yeah, so in a way it's quite a sort of abstract scenario. Obviously, I put these kind of documents in there that sometimes I start working from writing, but sometimes things also emerge more from a research trip or like a real project. And I want to unpack two of those scenarios briefly that deal with the materiality of finance. So for this, I go back to, in a way, the origin of the geography of the internet infrastructure currently. As said, this is rooted in this very early global universal network is how they used to call it, the All Red Line of the British Empire. And this plant was extremely important for that. It's in a way the same, you know, it's like coltan now for iPhones, or the material in Lisa's presentation. This was percaguta. It was natural rubber from trees in Indonesia and Malaysia, and this was the only type of tree where the rubber was resistant against the salty seawater. So this natural rubber functioned as a really good protective layer for these very early telegraph deep sea cables in the 1850s. Here you have these newspapers that are collected from these antique shops in London, where on the left side they introduce this new technology to the audience, like they show how it works, they show how they put the cables in the sea. It was really something that was celebrated and advocated as a sort of progress. And these were some images I had in my archive from the Turpin Museum in the Netherlands for some time, and there are images of how natural rubber was processed in a plantation in Indonesia. Then when I was digging this stuff for almost like 2 years, these kind of really strange things started popping up, and these are actually images I got from a Twitter account that collects them all, but I found them more randomly on the internet, and it was people finding strange blocks near beaches. And as you can see, they all have the same inscription, Chippeteer. And I think also the pictures are quite interesting. Everyone's sort of posing with it, like the special found, you know, but nobody actually really knew what it was until it was revealed as the Chippeteer mystery, because where were they coming from? They were actually coming from a rubber plantation in Indonesia. And here you can see a picture with the same inscription from that time. And these blocks were shipped to London, where they were processed into these submarine cables. But on its way in early 1900s, one of the ships sank, and the cargo was on the bottom of the ocean for more than 100 years, and then started breaking loose and washing up on shores in first Netherlands, France. By now it's also in the Caribbean and Japan. And of course I became this sort of, you know, I mean, I lost also a bit my objective, you know, I wanted to have one, this sort of greedy thing. So what happened is that I wrote these people, and they made this Facebook post. It's now gone, so I found this Google link. An artist from Amsterdam, Netherlands, is keen to borrow Chippeteer blocks for an exhibition in Europe. Femke plans to photograph the blocks, 3D scan them, and possibly make a cast. Could someone help? And then I got suddenly this mail with a phone number from this guy, and he said, call me. So I called him. And then we talked. He was a very friendly guy. But then he said, okay, the first thing I want you to know is they are not from the Titanic. And I was like, oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know. And then, but he was so kind to actually give me 3 of them. But it's very, I don't know how he got them. I have the feeling that his family is involved in some sort of, digging up shipwrecks. And I just want to show here, I found this thing this morning on my phone, like to say that I'm also not totally, how do you say, immune to these things. I sent this to my mom, like, oh, I cannot believe it. I have them, because there's something really strange in these blocks that come from Indonesia, this natural rubber that was processed, and they were on the bottom of the ocean, then they floated, and then they're in your studio. I mean, this sort of, yeah, fetish almost gaze in there. Anyway, I started making these casts, but as you can see, they have these tubes inside them. And these tubes have a geographic coordinate. And this coordinate refers to this, which are, which I don't really understand, but it's calculations by a mathematician and a physicist from Cambridge and MIT. And they were asked by a sort of organization, or not organization, but a sort of collaboration between a financial group and a seasteading group to calculate how high frequency trading can become faster in the future. And they basically calculated that if you see the two boxes on the side, if you see that that's a stock exchange, that as a high frequency trader you need to be exactly in the middle because you need to know the price difference in between the two to exploit that. That's called arbitrage. And so they calculated in a way this new map where they said all the little dots, this is my sort of visualization of it, but at all the little dots we have to start constructing floating data centers. And so in a way what I do is, yeah, I give these blocks, they come washing up on shore from the past, but I give them this mark in this new speculative planned infrastructure. So this is the Arctic series, and each of them carries a unique coordinate from the Arctic region where this infrastructure is planned. There's also points in the North Sea. They always lie on the floor like they just come washing up on shore. And then the last thing, do I still have like a few minutes? I want to talk, like this was obviously very much about a sort of materiality and, you know, a whole physical process of mining and how it's embedded in this whole colonial time. This is something that's going on right now in the financial world, which is actually not even, the mining gets another form in a way. This is the video that you also see there, and in a way it investigates the sort of relation of how scientific research feeds into financial speculation, and this is all placed in an area that is here, the white dot. I don't know if you can see it, in the north of Ethiopia, 50 kilometers of the Eritrean border. It's just to give you an impression. It's 100 meters below sea level. It's called a crypto depression. It's one of the hottest places on Earth. There's very few, there's a nomadic people called the Afar, and they still involved in salt trading here on the salt flats that you can see here. This is almost like the opposite of high frequency trading. You could say it's 2,000 years already going on in the same way. Oh, sorry. And what I found out when I was there last year in 2017, that this whole salt mining industry was actually, again, very close to me because I asked the Chamber of Commerce register to give me these documents. And here on the top you see Potassium Ethiopia. And there it's called Yara Dalo. And these are mailbox companies because you can see with the red parts there's no one working there. And this is basically a sort of tax infrastructure around this potassium mining that they're doing there. But they're also my neighbors in Amsterdam. So there's just this strange, of course, like geography again in there. But what is also for me interesting about the area is the area that geologists have now predicted that in 2 million years, I know it's quite far away, but Africa will have split in two continents. And this is the place, the north of Ethiopia, the Danakil Depression, where this is starting. And actually the salt flats are the first symptom of it because the continent is splitting in two, water comes up and forms this sort of salty layer. So there's also this scientific interest. As you can see here, there's also something very spectacular about the imagery. And it's something very unearthly, something very alien about it. It's also the place where Lucy, our ancestor of a few million years old, was found. So it has also this meaning of the cradle of humankind. But then also astrobiology of NASA just went on an expedition there to research extremophiles, which are bacteria that supposedly also are in Mars. So it's projected now as being this natural laboratory to investigate Mars on Earth. So it's another layer on top of that. And then when I got home from that, I started basically buying everything on eBay that I could find about this place. And I saw that in 1931 there was already a geographic publication where they called it the Forbidden Coast. In 1939 there was this book called The Hellhole of Creation. There was in 1935 also this photograph where they talk about the wild Danakil warriors were one of the main factors in the defeat of the Italians in 1896, because it's the only African country that actually was not colonized, only occupied. And so conceptually, you can forget about this, but I get interested in the sort of frontier stack. So how, on the one hand, it's you know, this place is labeled as the gateway to hell, the cruelest place on earth, the hottest place on earth, the land of the dead. On the other hand, there's this sort of cradle of humankind, geological wonder, future ocean floor, or there's like Mars on Earth. So there's all these different projections and narratives going on at the same time. Then I got interested also in aerial footage that was made by this Italian soldier in 1939. This was the first satellite image of that in 1970s. And this actually brings to the last point I want to make, and I'm really there. These are cube satellites. Because I was researching this aerial photography about this place, at the same time I already was looking for a long time into how cube satellites are used by finance in order to, we could call it optical mining actually. So these satellites are very cheap and easy to produce. They're just 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters. They're launched in the sky, and then they, for example, monitor from outer space, like here, a gold mine in Turkey, and they count how much trucks are coming by every day. And that's how they predict the value of gold, for example. Or here they monitor all the reservoirs all around the world, and they measure throughout the weeks if the shadow on the inside increases or decreases to predict how much volume fluctuation there is, and then they also predict for or against oil companies. So in this sense, there's not even a physical presence necessary anymore, like just this data is mined from the sky. Yeah, this was also going on in the Danakil Depression, and I was researching the satellite that makes use of, how can I say, they have a satellite image consists of 13 different images on top of each other, and in each layer they search for what they call a spectral signature. A spectral signature is how material reflects light, so gold has a different spectral signature than silver or than oil. And if you search for the right spectral signature, you can actually see, for example, on the right side, where silver is. You can search for that in your seemingly black and white image. Or here on the right side, it's a satellite image of a mine in Chile with that satellite, but the thing that pops up green is actually silver. This was also going on there, in that area, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Leave it. I'm sure everyone wants to ask about the crypto depression.
Can I show you the last part, how it ended up in the work? sorry. I just thought, oh, maybe. Yeah, so just to show you, like, so sometimes something happens more like a case study, and ends up like, am I doing something?
Airdrops in algorithmic skies, a rain of payload ashes. A crypto depression sets the stage. In an economy of sci-fi capital and speculative exits, some places are projected as zones of relief, others as zones of hostility. While data servers migrate to the cold north, less mobile life is confined within the blazing heat of inhospitable terrain. A continent splits in two. A new ocean is born. A spontaneous natural laboratory brings Mars to Earth. A stack of astrobiologists thinking deeper into the extraterrestrial scenery of life. Mining sediment and sentiment, a splitting continent offshores its own future. Prediction and deep time as allegorical props of the present. Blinding heat. Where do you place yourself in all of this? In the infinite space between image A and B. When a landscape gets dubbed as the hottest and cruelest place on Earth, our lazy, air-conditioned desire for new frontiers is instantly fulfilled. Extreme heat, extreme soil, extreme life, distilled into JPEGs of manageable risks. A cube satellite frames a splash of geothermal energy ahead of time. Timestamp, but the rains failed anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna switch it off, but just to.
Great, thank you. So we're going to open up for questions. We have about 25 minutes. I would just maybe start off first by thanking you both for the amazing presentations. If you haven't seen either of the works in complete, you can do so after this, before the exhibition is removed this evening. And as its own kind of high-speed opportunity. But I would really like to ask a question about maybe the edge of both of these works, where both speculatively and in reality, there's an incredible amount of profit to be made from these forms of vision, whether it's determining where the europium is on the ocean floor, or determining where we can invest in new forms of technology or mining or what have you. And so I'm interested if in your work you've also looked at, I mean, in many ways you've mapped this incredible landscape of contemporary extraction. Who benefits from this? In that we all have these screens and we're all participating in various forms of data mining, even as we sit here. But who are the people who benefit from this, and how do we start to understand their place in this diagram?
Well, I could say like for example, this optical extraction through satellites, this kind of data goes to hedge funds, who then trade in all sorts of bonds and stocks. And so I think there it really ends up in, a hands of just a few in a way. But, who are those hands? It's quite hard to define, because who are investors behind those hedge funds, etc. So it's always this kind of abstract thing again as well, at least for me. Like, you can trace some things back, but a lot of this investment is also private, or it's not like...
Because even in the image that you show, you find the company back in Amsterdam, which has 0 employees. Yeah. That there's no such... I mean, the company exists, but there's no physical reality that could ever be responsible for these...
Yeah, and I was working, for example, on this sort of timeline where I was putting all these events that happened in this Danakil depression from 2 million years ago when it was ocean floor. And I wrote them a letter like, oh, hello, I included you on the Danakil deep timeline. Can you verify if your description is correct? But of course, this letter just goes into a sort of vacuum, But so I think this thing of accountability is very hard to define, At least, I think maybe with Lisa, I don't know if it's a bit more concrete.
Yeah, I mean, benefit is also a question of how do you define benefit, right? I mean, there are financial benefits, obviously, but then there are also benefit can be looked at in various ways. I mean, you can also think about, okay, so the benefit is that I have a better image on my screen for me personally, but looking into the future, I mean, that image sort of causes, that beautiful image of a landscape, for example, causes the destruction of that landscape. So it's also, I think, when you look at benefit, it's also an issue of value.
Yeah, no, and I completely appreciate this, because, as we were saying earlier, the actual consumption of the image in this example of europium, by consuming the brilliance of this image that we are on these screens, not necessarily this one, that consumption of the image visually is the consumption of the mineral. It is eating the ocean floor as we consume it. But I would presume Nautilus and other companies involved in this have a fairly wide
yes.
profit margin compared to our visual entertainment. Or
Yes, certainly. I mean, they definitely do it because there's money to be made, right? I mean, that's and now, for example, for the rare earths, China has a monopoly, and so the industry looks into mining from the ocean floor. The ocean is a really interesting area, I think, because it's called the area. Like outside the national borders, it's just named as the area, and there obviously doesn't belong to any country. It belongs to, it's defined as the heritage of humankind. And so now the industrial countries can, through the ISA, the International Seabed Authority, sort of reserve places in the area for exploration, and so it's obvious also which countries, nations actually have the possibility to invest in the research and the exploration. It's certainly there's a huge divide. Yet again, also the more the world is modernizing all over, these materials are also more needed. Right. So it's very, very complex.
do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about your research methods, both from a sort of practical, you're traveling to places, dealing with translation, dealing with finding people on the ground, et cetera, but also more broadly in terms of kind of how you think about methodology, since the work is so research-driven. How do you think about the methods of that research?
Well, I mean, I was really, for this particular project, I was really sort of diving into it, really like sort of seeing connections through research, stringing it together. It was kind of for me, kind of an organic process where it was sort of a weaving and seeing things reappearing and just in a different shape, but very similar. And so there are a lot of, I think, cross connections, but I wouldn't really say that I have a method. It's just, follow. I think also, I think these methods you kind of develop along the way. Like, for example, like I said, my background is graphic design, so I used to map everything, and then I was like, but I need to understand what is the reality behind that map, so then I had to kind of learn to film and look at the landscape, and there's this sort of systematic approach in it, but I guess that would be something like you find the point in your data set and you go to this landscape. Usually there's nothing there, it's very remote, so you kind of have to do searches on the ground. It's also a place where there's usually no people. Like, so in my work you see very few people anyway, because it's about legislation and infrastructure, and not to say that it doesn't affect societies or communities, but so I would say that the methodologies that I use are not so much about how do I engage with a local community, much more about how do I get access to the data, how do you get a hack into something, or it's more about getting information in a way. And in finance they call this sourcing alpha. Sourcing alpha, like the satellite optical mining, that's the newest form of sourcing alpha, that's how they call it.
Are there other questions? I would fill in while you guys can use the microphones on either side, but both of you use, what would you call this, extraction propaganda, extraction visualization, and appropriate it entirely into your works. Both of them are equally remarkable in how banal they make resource extraction look. You showed a little excerpt in Femke's film. You can also see how resources magically become color-coded, set in lines, and are easily just plucked out of the ground. And I think for a lot of us, when we see that, there's just an immediate sort of dissonance that this is a complete falsification of that process. But you choose to show it, and I'm wondering if you talk about why you want people to see how finance imagines nature, why that image of nature from an extraction point of view is important to disseminate.
I mean, for me, I feel it's what struck me is really that nature is looked at as a commodity. It's really just it's just an object that can be exploited, and for me that comes very much across in the way it's visualized in these kind of promotion videos.
Yeah, I think for me, when I like the video that's in the 3-channel one, like you said, where we talked about it before, where there's this sediment of colors, and then I think for me what's really interesting about it and why I want to show it is because imagine these guys sitting in the design studio. They're like, oh, which color shall we pick for potassium? Oh, let's do red. You know, they have to make all these artistic choices that artists that use the same type of software, 3D rendering software. For me, that there is this sort of artistic angle in it that they have to decide upon in order to make us believe this value that is not there yet. And so in that sense, I want to really put it in there and make this connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just a quick question. So there's a line in one of the films saying that the unstable places create unstable value, but it seems like for a lot of these places, there's kind of vague ocean territories or sort of maybe less governed spaces that unstable places create kind of certain value for these companies. And so I'm wondering about kind of ways to maybe formalize these places, you know, turn financialization into a positive thing for nature. You know, Benjamin Bratton also has this idea of kind of objects or spaces that speak for themselves. In New Zealand, where I'm from, for instance, this Whanganui River has just had legal status, you know, given to it as a thing with sort of particular rights. And so I'm wondering if rather than, this kind of financialization of nature could be kind of flipped in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the line you're also referring to, unstable value creates, no, what was it? Unstable, I don't know.
Unstable
territory is unstable. Yeah, and I actually like this other research line that I have is called volatility storms, and it actually proves how, or not proves, but investigate how more financial markets totally, you know, like fluctuation, you know, so in that sense they can benefit from it. But I think there's a lot of examples, especially maybe in the last year and a half, where they also have, for example, a species swap derivative proposal, which is a financial derivative around protecting endangered species rather than, but they use the same instrument that in a way were used for mortgages. So I think that for sure can have interesting, but I mean, I'm not a financial expert in that sense. I would love to follow it, but yeah, I think there's initiatives for that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's this what you just brought up with a river in New Zealand is really interesting. It's also something that I'm thinking about a lot. Also, I've just been engaging with people in the South Pacific and talking a lot with them about this idea of seeing the ocean as an entity with legal rights, just as a human, which happened in New Zealand as well. And giving the ocean agency, which is something really interesting to think about. And I think that the influence of the South Pacific Islanders, specifically now in regards to the mining and their really different understanding of the relationship between land and ocean, and taking in regards different approaches in the international discourse about how we deal with ocean and resources, I think is really important. And I think that now, for example, Fiji was also hosting the COP23, and they're taking more and more part in these discussions, and I think that's very important. But on a larger scale, I don't know how we can really flip or even notions of decolonization, where we sort of relearn a different understanding of how we engage with the environment. I think that's really something that needs to happen.
But I think also, again, just from this amazing example of the rubber, which is a colonial product. I mean, it's a plantation product. The rubber was imported first as saplings to be grown in Indonesia for its ability to grow there, and then gets lost for 100 and some years, only to float up and remind us of that history and that infrastructural history. But again, I guess I would be a bit more skeptical on the rights of nature question, and I wonder, in India as well, a number of rivers that have been given rights, the question of, do we give things rights when we need to resuscitate them enough to extract from them some more? And of course, Ursula Beeman and Paulo Tavares' work in forest law, a really important video work explaining the rights of nature discourse in Ecuador and how it became constitutional, is incredibly important framing for these questions. But I wonder if maybe in the question of the rubber, but also in your idea of the swamp, that there's a certain rejection of seeing nature as it is. If it's going to have rights, it's going to have to clean up and kind of straighten up a little bit more, where the swamp is just a kind of reject nature. It can't represent itself. It won't speak for itself. Yeah. Where maybe between the swamp on one side as messy nature and Europium as like snortable nature right into the kind of main line, there's a kind of discrepancy. Yeah. Europium seems more like a rights-based cause than the swamp.
Yeah, but I think for me what's important about this notion of the swamp is that there's this you know, all these things we project on these landscapes in order to measure it and control it. In the end, they're kind of, there's always many things that escape our, you know, so maybe we give certain parts of nature rights and they become the sophisticated, you know, natural humans or something. But then you always will have this bunch of guys, nature guys, that escape all sort of training to become more like humans. And I think for me there is a kind of conceptually and artistically a potential in that to keep that alive, you know, to not try to treat nature more like us, maybe, but let it be what it is. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have a question? Person beside the microphone? No. Okay.
Hi. Great to be so.
Hey, Joel.
Hey, Etienne. Hi, Lisa, Femke. I'm sorry that I missed the first half. They wouldn't let me in. I was staying outside. But I just caught the end of Femke's amazing, outstanding, powerful work. But I wanted to just ask a kind of question, considering if we talked about the financialization of the environment, refer to that as environmentality, maybe, or a new form of governance power, like after Erich Horrell's general ecology stuff. And I was just curious about where you situate yourself between these two words, aesthetics and activism, because it's so beautiful, and it feels like I'm curious if you're leaning towards the implications of this extractivist work in a more social cultural way compared to the aesthetics that kind of makes it feel like so beautiful and amazing thing. There's a question in there, I think so.
Yeah, I think it's a very, it's a very interesting point, because I think this also is a very kind of balance that I always kind of try to find. If I say struggle, it sounds as something negative, but I think it's something positive. I think all this sort of mapping work that I did initially was very dry, and like there's no aesthetic point at all, which was in the first part of the presentation. There's not any aesthetic consideration. A lot of my work just also exists basically from going or making endless Excel sheets and stuff like that. So it's very the sort of bureaucratic, like, and I could present it like that. But I also had to admit to myself along the way that, you know, why do I like a certain image? There is a seductiveness in it. So if I can create a bonbon for you, you think, oh, it's a nice bonbon, and you eat it, and there's something sharp in it. And you're like, oh, what is this? You know, then maybe it's a tactic also to, yeah, so I think I kind of flirt and I play with more strategies in that sense. Like, yeah, we were talking about it earlier. For example, I also worked in the Netherlands case on the Panama paper stuff. This journalist asked me to join because I was working on this offshore finance. And then it's very hardcore dry journalism. But that has a relevance there. And I think, yeah, I'm not interested in saying like, oh, you know, I found the right solution to do it like this. I don't know. I try out different things. And maybe sometimes something is too seductive. But if you are intrigued by it and listening to my story because of the aesthetics initially, then that can also be a good thing. So yeah, I understand your point, and I think it's alive. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, in this particular project, it was interesting for me to deal with image and image making and the very matter of an image, and sort of I kind of got sick of all these like beautiful high-end images that I you know, that I saw and in advertisements and so on. And so I sort of, yeah, I kind of went a little bit against that in a way, and not making these glossy images, but filming them off of a screen, for example. So that was perhaps like an aesthetic choice or formal choice of how I dealt with images or telling the story. But in general, I mean, I'm interested in a good image, but an image can be good because of what it says, and that can be an ugly image or a highly aesthetic image. So for me it varies.
Yeah, no, I think also we should also not always censor ourselves like, oh, because we really want to reveal something, we cannot use aesthetics, you know? If you want to reveal something, maybe the best thing is to write just a really good article for the New York Times. That's the most effective way. But I think we're also artists because we have this other interest in the material and angle. And so I think to sometimes, like you said, sometimes this is a good image or that. I don't think we should feel bad or guilty about giving something a color or, yeah.
No, I think maybe another follow-up to Joel's question would be also, I mean, given the severity and brutality and violence of many of these forms of extraction that we can see all around us and are complicit in, I guess it's more a question for Femke, but I think it relates to Lisa's work as well. It's just, could you explain also why you choose to use fiction? Because I think there's also a question there of, if we return to my introductory remark about Ursula Le Guin, she was no stranger to the violence of white supremacy, of capitalism, of patriarchy, but she elected to work in a fictional space as a way to kind of force a kind of thinking that wouldn't be possible in nonfiction. And so I wonder, just from both of your kind of perspectives, how you see that kind of fabulation work as part of your practice, or how you see it as necessary right now.
I mean, my film is there's nothing fictional in there, even though I guess you always tell a story, and like that's becomes a sort of a personal story, and then in that way it's like, yeah, it's sort of a specific look on reality, let's say.
So just to clarify, that the people who are hoarding giant containers of europium in a place called Tradium, which is a military bunker, none of that part is fictional. Just if you haven't seen it, it fooled me.
Tradium exists. Europium exists, actually. I mean, for me, it almost sounded like something made up, like opium or imperium or something like a nice mixture of the two, maybe. Yeah, no, but yeah, it's all real.
It's all real.
Yeah, I think my interest in fiction is in a way twofold. Like, first of all, I think like the first slide I started with, you know, to imagine that you can make money of a hurricane that might or might not happen. You know, finance in itself is a creating force, you know. They're not responding to, it used to be about physical things, but now it's about inventing things. So in that sense, it's quite close to what we're, as artists, doing as well, I think. But I think what's for me important that, you know, when you only end up, or at least for me, when I only end up mapping things or showing things as they are, it's always a bit a dead end in a way. So I think I needed all that work in order to understand certain logics and certain strategies that finance uses. But now that you understand them, you can also use them to develop other narratives or other you know, scenarios. And I mean, this whole sprawling swamps thing is a very like early, like archaic form to do that. But you know, for me, it's this potential that we don't have to focus and map on what is there. We can also reject it and try to imagine something else. Yeah, that sounds the lamest ever, I know, because I hear it in every panel discussion. But yeah, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add that I think fiction is really exciting, actually, and imagination, and how that actually can possibly inform reality or change it. I mean, I always love that in fiction movies or science fiction films, and then how much you actually see how these particular films, this art, actually then inspires design and the reality or what we have now. There's, I think, so many things that probably wouldn't exist without that inspiration from fiction.
Anyone else? Yes?
I was talking to another spectator earlier about the film of Rave.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And he was convinced that europium was made up and that it was a documentary.
I like that.
Well, it's not made up. You all look at it all the time in your tablets or phones or laptops. And if you haven't had a chance to see either of the works, please do so before this pop-up gets torn down imminently. And so I'd like to thank Femke and Lisa for this conversation, and thank you all for sticking around. And please do, if you can, see the works before you go. Thanks again.